I accidentally found my late husband's old bank account. There was $33 million in it. But my husband always said we were poor, and his salary was $500 a month. When I called the bank, the manager answered with 3 words. Good day, dear listeners. It's Anna again. I'm glad you're here with me. Please subscribe to my channel and like this video. And also, let me know in the comments which city you're listening from. That way, I can see how far my story has traveled. People always say that grief changes you. What they never tell you is that sometimes grief opens a door you never knew existed, and behind that door is a room full of lies. My name is Carol Whitmore. I'm 53 years old. I live in a modest 2-bedroom house in Columbus, Ohio. And for 26 years, I was married to a man I thought I knew completely. His name was Richard. He died 14 months ago from a heart attack. Sudden, quiet, unremarkable. The way he lived, the way I always believed we both lived. We were not wealthy. That was the foundation of our life together. The thing I accepted early and never questioned. Richard worked as a mid-level logistics coordinator for a regional trucking company. His salary, he told me, was around $500 a month when we first married, rising slowly over the years to somewhere around $200 by the time he retired at 61. We clipped coupons, we vacationed at state parks. We drove used cars. When the washing machine broke in 2019, we argued for 3 days about whether to repair it or replace it, and we repaired it, because replacement felt like an extravagance we couldn't afford. I taught part-time at a community college, English composition, 2 or 3 courses a semester. My income was modest but steady. Between the two of us, we got by. We were comfortable in that particular American way that looks like contentment from the outside, but feels, if you're honest, like a careful permanent restraint. Richard was a quiet man, not cold. He laughed at his own jokes. He brought me coffee on Saturday mornings without being asked. He remembered my mother's birthday when I forgot. But he kept things close. I thought it was his nature. I thought it was what made him calm, reliable, steady. I never thought it was what made him a liar. He had a sister, Patricia Whitmore Hayes, 58, married to a man named Doug Hayes, who sold commercial real estate in Scottsdale, Arizona. Patricia and Richard were close in a way that always made me feel slightly outside something I couldn't name. They called each other every Sunday. They had private jokes I was never included in. When Richard died, Patricia arrived before the ambulance had even left our street. She stood in my kitchen, opened my refrigerator without asking, and made herself a cup of tea. I told myself she was grieving. I told myself I was being uncharitable. The paperwork after Richard's death was manageable. He had a will, modest, unsurprising, the house to me, a small life insurance payout, $45,000, which covered the funeral and a portion of what we owed on the HVAC system, his 401k, which contained $18,000. That was it. That was the estate of Richard Allen Whitmore, as I understood it. I spent several months moving through the administrative fog of widowhood, canceling accounts, notifying Social Security, sorting through his belongings, which I did slowly, reluctantly, in the way you do when every object still smells like the person you lost. It was in October, 14 months after his death, that I found the envelope. I was clearing out the top shelf of his home office closet, a task I'd been avoiding since the beginning, because that shelf held the things he cared about most. His father's watch, a folder of old photographs, the deed to the house. I was looking for the deed, actually, because I was refinancing. My hand went to the back of the shelf, past a shoebox I assumed contained receipts, and touched something that slid. A manila envelope, unsealed, tucked flat against the wall. Inside was a single sheet of paper, a bank statement, issued by First Meridian Private Bank, Chicago, Illinois. The account holder was listed as R.A. Whitmore. The statement was dated March 2021, 18 months before his death. The balance on that statement was $33,241,780.4. I sat down on the closet floor. I sat there for a long time. The afternoon light shifted. Somewhere outside, a neighbor's dog barked. I read the number again, and one more time after that. $33,241,780.04,780. My husband, who argued with me about a washing machine, had $33 million in a private bank account in Chicago. I don't know how long it took me to stand up and walk to the kitchen. I know I poured myself a glass of water and didn't drink it. I know I sat at the kitchen table for another hour. And then, because I am the kind of woman who, when confronted with something impossible, reaches for a practical action, I picked up my phone and called the number printed on the statement. Beat, the phone rang twice. A man answered, composed, professional, measured. First Meridian Private Bank. This is Gerald Bloom. I told him my name. I told him my husband's name. I told him I had found a statement and I needed to understand what I was looking at. There was a brief pause. Not the pause of surprise, the pause of a man choosing his words carefully. Then Gerald Bloom said exactly 3 words. He left instructions. I felt the floor shift beneath my feet. He left instructions. I must have said something after that, asked something. Responded somehow, because the call lasted another 4 minutes. But I have no memory of those 4 minutes. What I remember is hanging up and standing in my kitchen in Columbus, Ohio, holding a phone that had just rearranged everything I thought I knew about my own life. Gerald Bloom had been carefully uninformative. He'd confirmed the account existed. He'd confirmed Richard was the account holder. He told me that in order to discuss the specifics of the account and any associated documents, I would need to come in person to the Chicago branch with proof of identity, Richard's death certificate, and documentation of my status as his surviving spouse. He'd been polite, he'd been precise, and he had said absolutely nothing about what those instructions were. Who else might be aware of them? Or why my husband had spent 26 years telling me we were struggling to make ends meet while quietly sitting on a fortune. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in the bed Richard and I had shared for 2 decades, and I stared at the ceiling, and I did what grief had temporarily suspended, but couldn't stop forever. I thought about the washing machine. I thought about the vacations we hadn't taken because we couldn't afford them. I thought about my mother's surgery in 2017 when she needed a hip replacement and didn't have adequate insurance. And I had called Richard from the hospital parking lot and cried and said I didn't know how we were going to help her. And he had held my hand that night and said, "We'll figure something out, Carol. We always do." And we had scraped together $4,000 from our joint savings to cover the gap, and it had felt enormous, and he had let it feel enormous. And all that time, $33 million. I got up at 4 a.m. and went to the kitchen and made coffee and opened a legal pad and started writing. Not a plan yet, just a list. Everything I remembered that now looked different in this new light. The Sunday phone calls with Patricia. The way she always seemed to know things about Richard's mood, his thinking, his decisions before I did. The Christmas 2 years before his death, when she gave us a check for $1,000 as a gift, and I had been moved and grateful, and Richard had accepted it with a strange flatness, like a man enduring something rather than receiving something. The way Doug Hayes, her husband, always deflected when the subject of money came up, changed the subject with a particular skill of a man who'd been told to. Did Patricia know? I wrote that question at the top of the page and circled it 3 times. By 6 a.m., I had 2 pages of notes and a weight in my chest that sat somewhere between grief and fury. The grief was old. It'd been there since Richard died, and it didn't leave now, but the fury was new, and it was clean, and in a strange way, it was useful. It had edges. It pointed somewhere. I was afraid. I want to be honest about that. I was a 53-year-old part-time English instructor who had spent her adult life managing a modest household. I didn't have a lawyer on retainer. I didn't have wealthy friends with connections. I had a legal pad, a bank statement I'd found in a shoebox, and the words of a private bank manager ringing in my ears. He left instructions. What instructions? To whom? Beneficiaries? Patricia? Doug? Some arrangement that had been carefully constructed to exclude me, his wife, his legal next of kin. I knew enough to know I knew very little, and I knew enough to know that if I moved carelessly, I could lose everything. The first decision I made that morning was the most important one. I would not tell anyone what I'd found. Not my sister Karen in Pittsburgh, not my neighbor Donna, who is kind and well-meaning, and constitutionally unable to keep a secret. And certainly not Patricia Hayes, who called me every other Wednesday to ask how I was managing in a voice that now sounded in retrospect like a woman keeping tabs on a situation. The second decision, I would get a lawyer, not a general family attorney, an estate attorney. Someone who specialized in exactly this: contested estates, hidden assets, post-death financial discovery. Someone who would not be impressed by a private bank's polished composure and would know what questions to ask. The third decision was harder, and I sat with it for a long time at my kitchen table as the Columbus morning came gray and quiet through the window. The third decision was this: I would go to Chicago. I would walk into First Meridian Private Bank. I would sit across from Gerald Bloom, and I would find out what my husband's instructions were. But I would not go unprepared, and I would not go alone. I opened my laptop. I searched. Estate attorney, Columbus, Ohio. Hidden assets, deceased spouse. I wrote down 3 names from 2 different websites that mentioned probate litigation specifically. Then I closed the laptop, showered, dressed in the most composed thing I owned, a charcoal blazer I wore to faculty meetings, and drove to the public library, because I didn't want to make these calls from my home phone. The woman who walked into that library was someone I didn't quite recognize yet. She was frightened. She was exhausted. She had spent the night dismantling 26 years of her own memory. But she had a plan. The attorney's name was Margaret O'Shea. Her office was on the 4th floor of a building on East Broad Street in Columbus, and it was the kind of office that communicated seriousness without theater. Law books, a clean desk, 2 chairs that were comfortable without being luxurious. She was 51, Ghanaian American, with close-cropped natural hair and reading glasses she took off and set down before she spoke, which I would come to understand meant she was about to say something that required your full attention. I sat across from her on a Thursday morning and laid everything on the table. The bank statement, my notes, the timeline of Richard's death and estate, the 3 words Gerald Bloom had said. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she put her glasses back on, looked at the statement once more, and then looked at me. Mrs. Whitmore, she said, you were right not to tell anyone. And you were right to come here before you go to Chicago. She explained my situation with a clarity that was paradoxically both calming and alarming. Under Ohio law, as Richard's surviving spouse, I was entitled to an elective share of his estate, meaning that even if his will had attempted to exclude me, I had legal rights. The key question was whether this account had been structured in a way that placed it outside the probate estate. A trust, a beneficiary designation, a business entity. Private banks sometimes helped wealthy clients structure assets in ways that were legal, but designed to minimize a spouse's access. The phrase, "He left instructions," Margaret said, setting her glasses down again, tells me this account was almost certainly accompanied by some kind of directive. A letter of instruction to the bank, a named beneficiary, possibly a revocable living trust. We need to know which. She filed a formal legal request that same afternoon, a spousal rights inquiry, accompanied by Richard's death certificate and our marriage certificate, directed to First Meridian Private Bank's legal department in Chicago. She also filed a request with the Cook County Probate Court for a full asset disclosure order. These were not aggressive moves, she told me. They were procedural. They were the kind of moves that put a bank on notice that a surviving spouse knew her rights. It also, Margaret said with a careful neutrality, alarms anyone who might have an interest in that account that you are aware of its existence. That was the moment I understood fully what I was setting in motion. I drove home from Margaret's office and found 2 missed calls on my landline, both from Patricia. I didn't call back. I sat in the kitchen and watched my phone and waited for it to ring again. And when it did, I let it go to voicemail. Patricia's voice was warm and practiced. Carol, hi, it's me, just thinking about you. Wanted to check in. Call me when you get a chance, okay? Doug sends his love. She had never mentioned Doug sending his love in 14 months of Wednesday calls. I wrote that down. The following Tuesday, I drove to Chicago. I'd booked a single night in a mid-range hotel near the Loop, told no one where I was going, and left a note for my neighbor Donna, saying I'd be visiting a college friend. I brought every document Margaret had told me to bring, plus copies of everything organized in 2 separate folders in case one was lost. First Meridian Private occupied the ground floor of a glass building on North Michigan Avenue. It was exactly what you'd expect from an institution that managed the money of people who didn't discuss money. Quiet, expensive, deliberately calm. A receptionist led me to a conference room. Gerald Bloom arrived 4 minutes later. He was in his mid-60s, silver-haired, with the particular composure of a man who had sat across from difficult conversations for 40 years, and had learned to show nothing. He shook my hand. He offered water. He sat down. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, "I want to be straightforward with you. Now that your attorney has been in contact with us, we've been expecting this meeting." He placed a document folder on the table between us. "The account," he explained, "had been established in 2003, 4 years into our marriage. It was held under a revocable living trust titled the Roth Family Trust. Richard was the settlor. The trust named 2 beneficiaries upon his death, Patricia Whitmore Hayes for 60% and Douglas Hayes for 40%. I was not mentioned anywhere in the document, but here was the critical detail, the thing that changed everything. The thing that made Gerald Bloom's composure slip for just a fraction of a second when he placed the second document in front of me. Under a 2018 amendment to the trust, Richard had added a single handwritten addendum. It was dated March 14, 2018, 2 weeks after my mother's hip surgery. 2 weeks after I had cried in a hospital parking lot while my husband held $33 million in a private account in Chicago. The addendum read in Richard's unmistakable handwriting, "In the event my wife Carol becomes aware of this trust, full disclosure is to be made to her, and she is to be provided with independent legal counsel at the trust's expense. I believe she will know what to do." I stared at that paper for a very long time. He had known. Somewhere. Somehow in 2018 he'd written a door into the wall he'd built around me. I didn't know yet whether that made things better or worse. I didn't know yet whether it was guilt or love or some complicated mixture of both. What I knew was this: I had my first direct evidence, and Patricia Hayes had no idea I just read it. Margaret moved quickly after Chicago. The 2018 addendum was, in her words, an extraordinary piece of evidence, because it demonstrated that Richard himself had anticipated this moment and had explicitly provided for my involvement, if it didn't override the trust's beneficiary designations automatically. But it created grounds for a full probate challenge, combined with the spousal's elective share provisions under Ohio law, and a strong argument that the trust had been established using marital assets accumulated during our 26-year marriage. We had a case. We filed in Cook County Probate Court on a Wednesday morning. By Thursday afternoon, Patricia Hayes was calling my cell phone. I let it ring. By Friday, she was calling my landline. I let that ring too. On Saturday, Doug Hayes called from a number I didn't recognize. I answered that one because I hadn't recognized it and hadn't thought for one careless moment to check. "Carol." His voice was the same as always. Large, confident, the voice of a man who sold things for a living. "We need to talk." "Doug," I said, "you should speak with my attorney." "Your attorney?" He said the words the way you say something that offends you. "Carol, we're family." Richard would be heartbroken by this. "You're dragging his memory through a court system over a private financial arrangement he made years ago." "Speak with my attorney," I said again, and I hung up. I stood in my kitchen for a moment after I hung up. My hands were not shaking. I noticed that specifically that my hands were not shaking, and I filed it away as information about myself that I hadn't known before. They arrived at my house on a Tuesday evening, both of them. Patricia in a cream-colored coat I'd seen her wear at Richard's funeral. Doug in a sport coat, both of them standing on my front porch with the careful positioning of people who'd rehearsed this. I opened the door but did not invite them in. "We're not here to fight," Patricia said. Her voice was soft, grieving, expertly calibrated. "Carol, we loved Richard, we want to honor what he built. But this account, this trust, was his private decision. He had his reasons. Going to court is going to cost everyone. It's going to take years. It's going to be terrible for everyone who loved him." "What you're doing," Doug said, his voice dropping, is going to expose things Richard specifically didn't want exposed. Things about where that money came from. Things that could affect you too, Carol. Your reputation, your name. I looked at him steadily. Are you suggesting that my husband's money was obtained illegally? Doug blinked. The rehearsed version of this conversation had not included that question. I'm saying, he said more carefully, that some of Richard's business arrangements were complex, private. Going through a court process means those things become public record. Then I suppose they become public record, I said. Margaret O'Shea, my attorney. You have her number. I closed the door. I stood in the hallway for a long moment after I heard them walk back down the porch steps. Doug's voice carried. He was saying something sharp and low to Patricia, something that wasn't meant for me, but reached me anyway, through the door. She's not going to back down. We have to call Ferris. Ferris, a name I'd never heard. I wrote it down the moment I reached the kitchen. I called Margaret the next morning and told her everything. The phone calls, the visit, Doug's implication about the money's origins, the name Ferris. She was quiet for a moment, then said, "The threat about the money's origins is a bluff. If the money had been obtained illegally, they wouldn't want a court process either. They want you scared. They want you to walk away and take nothing." She told me she'd investigate the name Ferris through the trust's financial records once we had full disclosure access. "Carol," she said before we hung up, "you did exactly the right thing. You stayed calm, you gave them nothing, and you came to me immediately." I thanked her. I hung up, and then I did something I hadn't done in weeks. I drove 30 minutes to a state park east of Columbus, parked the car, and walked along a trail for 2 hours in the October cold. No phone, no legal pads, no statements. The trees were turning, reds and golds, and a particular fierce orange that Richard had always called the angry color. I teased him about that phrase every October for 26 years. I let myself be sad for a while. Not about the money, about him. About the man I'd loved, and the man I apparently hadn't fully known, and the way those two things existed in me simultaneously without canceling each other out. Then I drove home, made soup, and slept for 9 hours. When I woke up, I was ready again. The offer came by certified mail 10 days after my walk in the park. It was a formal letter from a law firm I'd never heard of, Harksissel and Ferris, LLC, based in Scottsdale, Arizona. That was the Ferris. Not a person Doug had been calling. And a partner in the legal firm that, it turned out, had drafted the Raw Family Trust in the first place and had been managing its administrative affairs for 2 decades. The letter was polite, almost courtly, in the way that letters written by attorneys threatening you sometimes are. It acknowledged my spousal claim. It acknowledged the 2018 addendum. And it offered me, in full and final settlement of all claims, the sum of $750,000. $750,000 from a $33 million account. I read the letter twice at my kitchen table. Then I photographed it and emailed it to Margaret. And then I did a thing I surprised myself by doing. I laughed. Not bitterly, almost with relief. Because $750,000 was, let me be precise about this, exactly 27% of what was in that account. It was an offer designed not to be accepted. It was an offer designed to see what kind of woman I was. I was the kind of woman who called her attorney and said, "Decline, and make sure they understand, we'll see them in court." Margaret filed our formal rejection the following morning. What happened in the weeks that followed was a particular kind of silence that I had come to recognize. Patricia stopped calling. Doug stopped calling. The certified letters stopped. The front porch remained empty on Tuesday evenings. They were watching, calculating, conferring with Hardcastle and Ferris. I was in a phase of the process that Margaret called the waiting room. Both sides in position, the machinery of the court in motion, nothing left to do but hold steady. I found to my own surprise that I needed people. I am not, by nature, someone who reaches easily for others. Richard's death had made me more solitary in some ways. I'd retreated into routine, into work, into the particular quiet of a house where someone used to be. But this situation was too large to carry alone, and I needed the weight distributed. I called my sister Karen. Karen is 4 years younger than me, lives in Pittsburgh, and works as a high school guidance counselor. She's practical and loving and completely without drama. which is precisely what I needed. I drove to Pittsburgh on a Friday evening and sat in her kitchen. A kitchen nothing like mine, cluttered and warm and smelling of the garlic she puts in everything. And I told her everything. She listened the way Margaret listened, completely, without interrupting. When I finished, she poured us both another cup of coffee, and she said, "That man, Carol, that man." She said it 3 times, each time with a different weight. And somehow those 6 syllables covered everything I'd been unable to say to anyone for weeks. Then she said, "Tell me what you need." What I needed, it turned out, was practical and simple. I needed someone who knew the full picture to be available when I called. I needed someone to talk through the emotional tangle with, not a therapist, though Margaret had gently suggested that. And she wasn't wrong, but a person who knew Richard, who had sat at our Thanksgiving table, who could hold the contradiction of him alongside me, without needing me to resolve it. Karen did that. She drove to Columbus the following weekend and spent 2 days with me. We went through old photographs, not morbidly, but with the curiosity of 2 women, trying to identify something that had been hiding in plain sight. We found things, small things. A receipt from a Chicago restaurant dated 2009, a weekend I hadn't known he'd taken, a phone number written on the back of a business card in the desk drawer, a Chicago area code, no name, a birthday card from Patricia dated 2015 that read, "In part, Richard, you're doing the right thing. Trust me. Love P. The right thing, trust me." Karen photographed everything. Margaret received the photographs by email on Sunday evening and replied at 10:00 p.m. with 3 words of her own. "Very good. Keep looking." I also, in those weeks, returned to teaching. I had 2 sections of English composition that semester, and I had been, I'll admit it, distracted, arriving prepared but not quite present. I made a deliberate decision to be present again. I graded papers, I held office hours. I ate lunch in the faculty lounge and listened to my colleagues talk about their weekends and their students and the upcoming conference in Cincinnati. It sounds small. It wasn't small. There is something grounding about being useful in ways that have nothing to do with the thing threatening to consume you. My students didn't know anything about $33 million, or the Roth Family Trust, or Hardcastle and Ferris. They knew that their semicolons were consistently wrong, and that I'd written extensive notes in the margins of their drafts, and that I expected revision. That was enough. That was real. I drove home from campus one evening in November, and sat in the car in my driveway for a moment before going inside. The neighborhood was quiet. The trees had lost their leaves. The house, my house, looked exactly the same as it always had. I thought, I am going to win this. Not with bravado, with the calm certainty of a woman who had done her preparation, assembled her people, and was no longer afraid of what waited on the other side of a door. I went inside. I made dinner. I was ready for what came next. They came again in December. This time Patricia came alone without Doug, which I understood immediately was a strategic choice. Doug had shown his edge on the porch that October night. His implication about the money, his vaguely threatening tone. He'd been too visible, too obviously a man with something to protect. Patricia was the softer instrument, and someone Harcourt Castle and Ferris probably had decided to deploy her. She called first. She asked if she could come by. She said she'd been thinking about Richard constantly, that she was struggling, that she just wanted to sit with someone who had loved him. Her voice carried a tremor that sounded genuine, and for a moment, I want to be honest about this, I felt the pull of it. Because here is the thing about Patricia that I had to keep reminding myself. She was Richard's sister. She had loved him in her way, whatever her way was. The grief was real, even if everything else was strategic, and I had been lonely too. And Richard was gone. And there was a version of this situation in which 2 women who had both lost him could sit together and be sad. I let her come. She arrived on a Thursday afternoon, carrying a small tin of shortbread cookies, the brand Richard had liked, and I knew even then that the cookies were calculated. She set them on the kitchen counter, and I made tea, and we sat at the table where I had sat 14 months ago, reading a bank statement that had dismantled my life. For the first 20 minutes, she was just Patricia. She talked about Richard as a boy, stories I'd heard before. but loved because they were the only version of him from before I knew him. The time he'd broken their mother's ceramic rooster by accident and hidden the pieces in his closet for a year rather than confess. The way he'd always whistled while he cooked. I let myself be moved by those stories because they were true, and I let her see that I was moved because that was also true. Then she shifted. I felt it before she said anything, a small change in her posture, a setting down of her teacup. "Carol," she said carefully, "Richard was a complicated man. I know that's not what you want to hear right now, but he made decisions for reasons. He wasn't trying to hurt you." "I know he was complicated," I said. "The money." She stopped, composed herself. "The way he arranged things, it was never about not trusting you. It was about protecting something that was built before the two of you, that was family, that he felt a responsibility toward." "Before the two of us?" I said. "Patricia, we married in 1997. This account was opened in 2003. We were married, I know. But there were family considerations, things that had been understood between us for a long time before that." "What was understood?" I said. "Between you and Richard that required $33 million to be hidden from me for 20 years. She looked at me steadily. "I think you know that pursuing this in court is going to be painful for everyone. For his memory, for the family he loved. I think," I said, "that Richard wrote a specific addendum in 2018 stating that if I ever became aware of this trust, I should be given full access to its contents and independent legal counsel." That sounds less like a man protecting a family arrangement, and more like a man who was not entirely comfortable with that arrangement. Something moved across her face. Not quite anger, something more controlled than anger, and therefore more cold. "That addendum," she said quietly, "was written during a difficult period for Richard. He wasn't well that year. He was perfectly well in 2018, I said. He golfed twice a week. He taught himself to make sourdough bread. You came to visit us in August of that year, and the three of us drove to Hocking Hills. He was well." She put her hands around her teacup. Her knuckles were white. "Carol." Her voice had changed. The warmth was gone. "Not entirely, but enough. This is going to hurt you. The legal process, the discovery, the things that will come out about Richard's business associations. It will change how you remember him, how everyone remembers him. Is that what you want? Is that worth it to you? For money?" I looked at her across the table. My mother had a phrase she used. "See them clearly, not meanly clearly." "Patricia," I said, "I have been a good wife to your brother for 26 years. I trusted him. I believed every story he told me about our financial situation. When my mother needed surgery, I cried in a parking lot while your brother had $33 million in a private account. I'm not pursuing this for money. I'm pursuing this because what was done was wrong. And because Richard himself, whatever his reasons for the original arrangement, left me a door." She stood up. She picked up her coat from the back of the chair. She was contained, perfectly, impressively contained, but I could see the effort it cost her. "I hope you know what you're doing," she said. "I do," I said. She left the shortbread on the counter. I closed the door behind her and stood in the hallway, and then I did something I hadn't expected. I shook, not from fear exactly, from the expenditure of having held myself that steady for that long. I sat on the stairs and pressed my back against the wall and breathed. But as the shaking passed, something else came in behind it, something clean and hard and warm all at once. I was not going to back down, and Patricia Hayes had just confirmed by her desperation that she already knew it. The hearing was scheduled for February, but it wasn't a trial. It was a discovery hearing in Cook County Probate Court, convened to review the full financial history of the Raw Family Trust and determine the applicable rights of all interested parties. Margaret had described it to me as the moment the other side has to stop being vague. She was right. I dressed carefully that morning. A dark navy suit I'd bought for Richard's memorial service and hadn't worn since. Sensible heels. No jewelry except my wedding ring, which I was still wearing. Not for sentiment, or not only for sentiment, but because in a hearing about what I was owed as Richard's wife, it seemed precisely relevant. The courtroom was smaller than I'd expected. A probate hearing room rather than a grand courtroom, but it had the weight of the law in it. The formality that made everyone sit slightly straighter. Patricia and Doug sat on the other side of the room, with two attorneys from Hardcastle and Ferris. Patricia wore black. Doug wore a suit that was slightly too expensive for the occasion, the way Doug always was. They didn't look at me when I came in. Margaret had obtained, through the discoveries process, 3 years of financial records from the trust. What those records it contained had been shared with me the week before the hearing, and I had read through them twice at my kitchen table, with a highlighter and a legal pad, making notes in the margins the way I marked my students' essays. Carefully, looking for the underlying structure of the argument. The underlying structure, it turned out, was damning. The trust had been funded primarily through a series of investments Richard had made, beginning in 2001, using capital that was, beyond any legal ambiguity, marital property. Money deposited into our joint account from his salary, the salary I believed was modest, had been systematically diverted into a separate account maintained under a business entity called Raw Logistics Consulting, LLC, before being transferred quarterly into the trust. For 20 years, Richard had been paying himself a real salary from the company's operations and reporting only a portion of it to our joint household. The rest, accumulating over 2 decades with investment returns, had become $33 million. Margaret presented this to the court with the specific calm of someone who has done an enormous amount of work and knows it. Then Hardcastle and Ferris's lead attorney, a sharp-faced man named Leonard Cade, argued that the trust's assets were entirely Richard's separate business proceeds and not subject to spousal claims. He was precise. He was confident. And then Margaret asked the court to admit Exhibit 14, bank transfer records, showing that the initial capitalization of Raw Logistics Consulting, LLC fee in 2001 had come from a $40,000 withdrawal from our joint checking account. A withdrawal I had no memory of authorizing because I'd been in Pittsburgh that week attending my father's retirement party. I had receipts. The room changed when that exhibit went in, not dramatically. Courts don't work dramatically, but I saw Leonard Cade pause before he continued speaking, and I saw Doug Hayes lean toward Patricia and say something in a rapid, low voice. And I saw Patricia press her lips together in a way I had never seen her do before. The expression of someone watching something they cannot stop. The judge, a compact, precise woman in her 60s, named the Honorable Denise Fogarty, asked Katie directly whether the trust's funding documentation could confirm the source of the initial capitalization. Cade said he would need to review the specific transfer. Mr. Cade, Judge Fogarty said, with the patience of a woman who had seen this particular delay tactic many times, the transfer is dated June 14, 2001. It originated from a joint checking account held by Richard and Carol Whitmore. We have the bank record. I'd like your client's response. There was a pause. Across the room, Doug Hayes was very still. Leonard Cade said, "The trust's position is that Mr. Whitmore had authority over joint funds and used that authority in a manner consistent with his role as primary earner in the household." "Mrs. Whitmore," said Judge Fogarty, turning to our table, "was this withdrawal discussed with you?" Margaret stood. "Your Honor. Mrs. Whitmore has a sworn affidavit confirming she was in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, during the week of that withdrawal. She also has documentation showing she was unaware of Raw Logistics Consulting LLC until these proceedings." I sat at that table and I held myself very still. I did not look at Patricia. I did not look at Doug. I looked at Judge Fogarty and I let the facts do their work. The unraveling when it came was not theatrical. It was methodical. Over the next 2 hours, Katie's position shifted by degrees from confident assertion to careful qualification to something that sounded increasingly like retreat. Margaret pressed each concession: the trust's initial funding, marital assets, the ongoing transfers, documented, systematic, concealed from the marital estate. The 2018 addendum, Richard's own acknowledgement that Carol had a right to know. At one point, Patricia was asked directly by the judge's clerk to confirm her understanding at the time of the trust's creation that it was funded by marital assets. Her attorney, objected. The judge sustained the objection, but the question had been asked, and it sat in the room. Doug Hayes looked for the first time in our long acquaintance genuinely uncertain. The practiced confidence was gone. He kept his eyes on the table in front of him, and he did not look up when Margaret concluded her presentation. And he did not look up when the judge said she would render a preliminary ruling within 15 days. When we stood to leave, Patricia finally looked at me. Just for a moment. Her face was composed. She was always composed, I'll give her that. But her eyes were a particular kind of empty that I recognized. It was the look of a person who has been holding something for a very long time and has just felt it begin to slip. Eddie, I nodded to her the way you nod to someone you have nothing more to say to. Margaret and I walked out into the February cold of North Michigan Avenue. The lake was gray and enormous at the end of the street. She'll rule in our favor, Margaret said quietly. I believed her. Judge Fogarty's preliminary ruling came on a Thursday morning, 12 days after the hearing. Margaret called me at 8:47 a.m. I was in my office at the community college between classes grading a stack of second drafts on Zora Neale Hurston. Carol, Margaret said, we won. I put down my red pen. The ruling was thorough, 23 pages which Margaret walked me through that afternoon in her Columbus office. Judge Fogarty had found that the initial capitalization of the Raw Family Trust, having originated from marital joint funds without the documented knowledge or consent of Carol Whitmore, constituted a misappropriation of marital assets. The ongoing diversion of income into the trust via Raw Logistics Consulting LLC compounded this finding. While Richard had legal authority to make many financial decisions independently during the marriage, the scope and systematic concealment of these transfers crossed into a violation of fiduciary duties within the marital relationship. The trust, as structured, could not legally exclude me. Under Illinois law and applicable Ohio spousal rights provisions, my elective share of the marital estate, which the court had now properly valued at the full trust balance plus accrued investment returns, amounted to $16.9 million. $16.9 million. I sat in Margaret's office and let that number exist in the room. Leonard Cade filed an objection within 48 hours, and Margaret told me this was expected, procedural, and unlikely to succeed given the quality of the evidentiary record. She was right. The objection was denied within 3 weeks. What happened next unfolded over the following 4 months with the grinding, comprehensive thoroughness of the legal system working as it was designed to work. Hardcastle and Ferris offered a settlement, $11 million. Margaret declined. They offered $13 million. Margaret declined. They offered $15 million, and a stipulation that Patricia and Doug would retain the remainder of the trust without further dispute. Margaret called me. Carol, $15 million is a meaningful number. The remaining litigation will take months, possibly a year, and there's always risk in any legal proceeding. Margaret, I said, what does the ruling say we're entitled to? 16.9. Then I want 16.9. There was a brief pause. I could hear her smiling. All right, she said. We decline. Final settlement, negotiated not from a position of compromise, but from a position of documented legal entitlement, was reached in June. 16 Zider $85 million to an account in my name with an additional $50,000 in legal fee reimbursements. Patricia and Doug retained the remaining $16 million in the trust plus accrued returns less substantial legal fees of their own. Close to $800,000 by the end, Margaret estimated, given the length and complexity of the proceedings. The day the transfer cleared, I was in my backyard in Columbus. It was a warm June morning. I had coffee. I had my neighbor Donna's tabby cat, who had wandered over as she did sometimes, and was sitting on the porch railing with the particular authority of cats. I looked at the number on my phone's banking app for a long time. Then I called Karen. It's done, I said. She cried. I didn't. Not then. Not at that moment. That would come later, alone in the quiet of the house. The good cry that had been waiting a long time. But in that moment, I was simply steady, looking at my backyard in the June morning. The grass I'd been meaning to reseed along the fence line. The oak tree Richard had planted the first year we'd moved in, which was now taller than the house. Margaret had one final conversation with me before we formally closed out the engagement. She sat across from me in her clean office and took her glasses off and set them down. You should know, she said, that in 22 years of estate litigation, I've had very few clients who held up the way you did. Mean. The offer at $750,000 would have broken most people. The visit from Patricia would have broken most people. You didn't flinch. I flinched. I said. I just did it in private. She smiled. That's the same thing. One more thing happened before I consider the chapter truly closed, and I want to include it because it mattered to me more than the money. 2 weeks after the settlement, I drove back to First Meridian Private Bank in Chicago. I had called ahead and asked to meet with Gerald Bloom. He received me in the same conference room, the same table, the same water glass. I placed the copy of Richard's 2018 handwritten addendum on the table between us. I believe she will know what to do. He came here in 2018 to add this, I asked. He did, Gerald Bloom said. He came alone. He was very quiet. He didn't explain his reasons. Did he seem? I stopped. What word was I looking for? Guilty? Remorseful? Afraid? Did he seem like a man who had made peace with something? Gerald Bloom considered that for a moment. He was a careful man, a lifetime of care in that face. He seemed, he said slowly, like a man who wanted to leave something right. I thanked him. I drove back to Columbus. I sat in the oak tree's shade in my backyard, and I let my husband be complicated, and I let myself be the woman who had survived it. It's strange the way a life restructures itself around a new truth. You think the money will change everything at once. It doesn't. It changes slowly in layers, not with a single dramatic announcement, but with 100 small shifts you only recognize looking back. The first thing I did was the washing machine. Not because I needed to. The old one still worked, but because I wanted to stand in a Home Depot and choose the best one without looking at the price tag first. I stood in the laundry room afterward and felt something I had no word for. Not triumph. The relief of a restraint finally released. I worked with a financial advisor to build a structure for the money that would serve me long term. A trust of my own, investments. A small, charitable foundation covering medical costs for families who couldn't afford necessary surgery. Renamed for my mother, whose hip replacement had sent me crying to a hospital parking lot, while $33 million sat in Chicago. I traveled. Portugal with Karen, Lisbon. Bread. I'll never stop thinking about miles walked before the heat came. Scotland alone in November, which I'd been afraid to do and turned out to be something I was very good at. I kept teaching. I developed a writing workshop for adult learners returning after significant life breaks. Divorce, illness, loss. 9 students the first semester. 3 of them stayed an hour after the final class just to keep talking. That course still fills every semester. As for Patricia and Doug Dutton, the legal fees, nearly $900,000 by final accounting, had cracked something in their Scottsdale life. The house with the pool was sold. Doug's business brought in a partner under unfavorable terms. Patricia moved to Phoenix. I felt no satisfaction in this. I felt distance, the clean-earned distance of a woman who had closed a chapter properly. Richard, I thought about often. The man with the secret and the man who'd left me a door existed alongside the man who'd brought me coffee on Saturday mornings. Merry marriage is a living record, and mine contained more deception and more love than I had known. The oak tree he planted our first year is very tall now. I had a bench placed beneath it. Some mornings I sit there, and I think the woman who found that envelope did all right. At my sister's wedding, my 8-year-old son grabbed my hand. His face had gone pale. He was trembling. "Mom, we have to leave right now." I frowned. "What's wrong?" He scanned the room like he was afraid someone was watching us. Then he shoved his phone into my hand. "Mom, just watch." The moment I saw what was on that screen, my blood ran cold. My sister Lauren had always believed appearances could fix almost anything. A strained relationship could be repaired with the right family photo. A bad financial decision could be softened with a tasteful explanation. A wedding that cost far more than anyone could reasonably afford could become an investment in memories. If the flowers were imported, and the photographer had enough followers on Instagram. So naturally. Her wedding took place at Willow Creek Estate, a renovated horse farm 40 minutes outside Columbus, Ohio. The property had white fencing, rolling fields, a restored red barn, and a stone terrace overlooking a pond that looked almost too perfect to be real. Every corner had been arranged for photographs, soft linen signs, antique lanterns, gold-framed seating charts, and pale pink roses tucked into places where roses had no practical reason to be. By 9 that morning, I had already fixed 3 problems Lauren didn't know existed. The florist had delivered the wrong number of centerpieces. 2 table snorts had been assigned the same number. The caterer's manager had pulled me aside near the service entrance and quietly explained that the final payment had not cleared. "I'm sure it's just a bank delay," I told her. She gave me the careful smile people use when they know they are speaking to someone who is not responsible for the mess, but maybe the only person capable of cleaning it up. "We need confirmation before dinner service," she said. "I'll handle it." That had been my role in the family for as long as I could remember. Lauren created emergencies. My mother panicked about them. I handled them. At 36, I should have known better than to keep accepting the assignment. "Mom, my tie feels weird." I turned and found Ethan standing behind me in his navy suit, tugging at his collar. At 8 years old, he had Mark's dark hair and my tendency to study a room before speaking. He looked handsome, uncomfortable, and deeply suspicious of formal clothing. "Come here." I loosened the knot slightly, then smoothed his collar. "Better?" "A little. You only have to wear it until after the pictures." "That's what you said about the shoes." I smiled despite myself. "The shoes stay." He sighed with the exhausted patience of a much older man. Then he lifted the old phone I had given him for games, videos, and emergencies. It had no active cellular plan, but it worked on Wi-Fi. And Ethan had recently become fascinated with making short movies. "I'm filming behind-the-scenes stuff for Aunt Lauren." "That sounds dangerous." She said she wanted candid moments. She does not know what candid means. Ethan grinned and ran toward the bridal suite before I could warn him not to record anyone getting dressed. I watched him go, and for a few seconds, the pressure in my chest eased. Then Mark walked through the barn doors. My husband looked exactly the way everyone expected him to look. Polished, relaxed, and effortlessly useful. His charcoal suit fit perfectly. His hair was neatly styled. He carried 2 boxes from the bakery, as if he had personally rescued the wedding cake from a burning building. "There he is," my mother said, hurrying toward him. "Thank God, Mark. The guest book table still isn't set up." "I've got it, Martha." He kissed her cheek, handed the boxes to a server, then crossed the room and placed one hand against my lower back. To anyone watching, it was affectionate. To me, it felt staged. "You look beautiful," he said. "Thank you. You could try sounding like you mean it." I kept my smile in place because my aunt was standing 10 feet away. "You snorts could try saying it when nobody's watching." His expression tightened for half a second, then softened again. That was Mark's gift. He could move from irritation to charm before anyone else noticed the shift. We had been living separately for almost 3 months. He had rented an apartment near his real estate office, though he called it Timbertrees, and insisted our marriage was not over until we had given counseling a real chance. We had already spent 9 months in counseling. Mostly, Mark had used those sessions to explain why my reactions were the actual problem. Lauren knew we were separated. My mother did not. Mark had argued that announcing it before the wedding would be selfish. "Your sister gets one day," he had said. "We can keep our problems private for 24 hours, miss," I had agreed. Partly because I didn't want to hurt Lauren, and partly because I was tired of being told that honesty was cruelty whenever the truth inconvenienced someone. Now Mark held my waist while relatives smiled at us. "You said you needed me to sign something tonight," I murmured. "Just some banking paperwork." "What kind?" "Nothing complicated. A refinance adjustment." I turned slightly. "For the house?" "We'll talk later." Before I could press him, Lauren appeared in the doorway of the bridal suite, a silk robe and a look of controlled panic. "Claire, I need you." Of course she did. For the next 2 hours, I pinned a loose hem, found a missing earring, called the rental company about 6 absent chairs, and reassured my mother that gray clouds did not automatically mean a tornado. Through it all, I kept noticing Mark and Lauren together. Once near the catering kitchen, again beside the hallway leading to the private offices. Later, outside the bridal suite, speaking in low voices until Lauren saw me and abruptly asked whether I had checked the champagne count. It was odd, but not impossible. Mark had helped arrange part of the financing for Daniel's renovation company, and Lauren often treated him like an unofficial business advisor. Still, something in the way they separated bothered me. Shortly before the ceremony, Ethan found me near the welcome table. "Dad was talking to Aunt Lauren in the back hallway," he said. "About what?" "I don't know. They stopped when somebody came by." I adjusted his boutonniere. "They're probably dealing with wedding stuff." He looked unconvinced. "Can I use the bathroom?" "Take the hall past the bridal suite, the second door on the left." He nodded and hurried away. The ceremony began 20 minutes later. I stood beside Lauren beneath an arch covered in roses, while Daniel waited at the front in a dark blue suit, visibly fighting tears. Lauren looked radiant. My mother cried before the music even changed. Mark sat in the second row with Ethan's empty chair beside him. I glanced toward the barn doors. No Ethan. The officiant began speaking about trust, partnership, and the courage required to build a life with another person. Then Ethan slipped into the room. He did not return to his seat. He walked straight toward me. At first, I thought he was sick. His face was colorless and his arms were rigid at his sides. When he reached the edge of the wedding party, he grabbed my hand hard. "Mom," he whispered, "we have to leave right now." I crouched slightly, trying not to draw attention. "What's wrong?" His eyes moved toward Mark, then Lauren. He pulled out his phone and pushed it into my hand. "Just watch." The video had started in the hallway. The camera pointed toward the floor, catching polished shoes, a strip of patterned carpet, and the bottom of a half-open door. Then I heard Mark's voice. "She'll sign after the reception." Lauren answered quieter. "What if she reads it?" "She won't. And if she does, we go with Plan B." There was a pause. "What about Ethan?" Lauren asked. Mark's reply was clear. "Once I have temporary custody, Claire won't control the trust anymore." My fingers went numb. Lauren whispered, "You already used her signature. That could be fraud." Mark gave a short laugh. "It only becomes fraud if she refuses to validate it." The camera shifted. For 1 second, I saw a folder in Mark's hand. My name was printed across the front. Then Lauren said, "After everything she's done for me, I still can't believe we're doing this." Mark's voice turned cold. "Then stop thinking of it as stealing. Think of it as borrowing from someone who has more than she needs." The video ended. I looked toward the altar. My sister was smiling beneath $1,000 worth of flowers. My husband was watching me from the second row. I sent the video to myself, uploaded it to cloud storage, and texted Rachel Kim, my attorney. "Emergency. Possible fraud involving Ethan's trust. Call me now." A shadow fell across the phone. "There you are," Mark said pleasantly. "I've been looking for you." I locked the screen. His gaze moved from my face to Ethan's. "Is something wrong?" I forced myself to smile. "Not yet." For the next 30 seconds, I forgot where I was. The music, the flowers, the guests, everything faded into the background. All I could hear was Mark's voice. "Once I have temporary custody, not because he wanted to spend more time with Ethan, not because he thought I was an unfit mother, because he wanted control of my son's trust." I looked down at Ethan. His little chest was rising too fast. His eyes kept darting around the room, searching every face. I squeezed his hand. "You did the right thing." His voice cracked. "Are you mad?" My heart broke. "No, sweetheart." I brushed his hair away from his forehead. "I'm proud of you." He finally took one slow breath. "I thought Dad was going to see me. He didn't. But what if he did?" I leaned closer. "Then I would have protected you." Those words came out before I even thought about them. Because they were true. No matter what happened next, that was my job. The wedding ceremony continued. Lauren was saying her vows now. "I promise to always be honest with you." The words hit me like a slap. Honest. I stared at my little sister. The same little girl whose scraped knees I'd cleaned, whose science projects I'd stayed up late helping finish, whose rent I'd quietly covered 3 years earlier after she lost her job. She couldn't even look me in the eye now. Not once. She kept staring at Daniel, at the guests, at the photographer. Anywhere but me. She already knew. She knew I wasn't supposed to hear that conversation. She just didn't know that I already had. I slipped my phone into my clutch. Then I leaned toward Ethan. "I need you to do something." "What?" "I want you to stay with Grandma until dinner." His eyes widened. "What about you?" "I have to take care of something." He hesitated. "Are you leaving?" "No, not yet. But I need you somewhere safe." He nodded. I kissed his forehead. Go sit with Grandma. He walked toward the front row. Mom immediately wrapped an arm around him, assuming he'd gotten nervous before the ceremony. Good, let her think that. For now. Yeah. The applause erupted as Lauren and Daniel kissed. Everyone stood. Everyone smiled. Everyone celebrated. I stood there clapping while my entire marriage collapsed inside my chest. Mark found me almost immediately. There you are. He slipped beside me. You disappeared. I was with Ethan. Everything okay? I looked directly at him. He smiled exactly the way he'd smiled for 18 years. Warmed. Completely fake. He got nervous. Mark nodded sympathetically. Poor buddy. Then he lowered his voice. After dinner, let's find a quiet place. We still have those papers. There it was. Not 20 minutes after discussing fraud, he was already trying to finish the job. I smiled. Sure. Relief flashed across his face. It lasted less than a second, but I saw it. Nah. Cocktail hour began outside on the terrace. Guests laughed over champagne. A jazz trio played near the pond. Children chased each other across the lawn. Nobody knew that my life had just split into two pieces. The life before Ethan handed me that phone and everything after. My own phone vibrated. Rachel Kim. I stepped away from the crowd. Rachel. I watched the video. No greeting. No small talk. Her voice had changed. What do I do? You stay calm. I can do that. No confrontation. I wasn't planning to. Good. I heard papers moving on her desk. Claire. Listen carefully. I'm listening. That video is important. Is it enough? It's enough to make me very concerned. She chose every word carefully. It shows intent. It suggests fraud. It suggests a custody strategy tied to money. But it doesn't prove the documents themselves are fraudulent. So don't warn him. I closed my eyes. I wasn't going to. He thinks he's ahead. Keep it that way. What about the paperwork? If he asks you to sign anything, she paused. Don't. What if he pressures me? Take pictures. What if he won't let me? Find an excuse. What about Ethan? Keep him away from every conversation. I looked across the lawn. My son was feeding breadcrumbs to ducks with my mother. Rachel continued. Tonight, back up that video 3 different ways. Already sent it to myself. Good. Cloud storage? Do it. What else? I'll contact the trust administrator first thing tomorrow. She became even more serious. And Claire, yeah? If there's any chance that trust already been used, she exhaled slowly. We're moving fast. I returned to the reception just as family photos began. Lauren linked her arm through mine. You disappeared. I had to check on Ethan. She smiled for the photographer. He okay? He's fine. Another flash. Another forced smile. She whispered without moving her lips. Thanks for helping today. I looked at her. Helping? That word almost made me laugh. Instead, I asked quietly, Lauren, Are you happy? Her smile flickered. What kind of question is that? The kind your sister asks. She hesitated. Then the photographer called, eyes here, another flash. Lauren smiled again, too quickly, too perfectly, yee. Dinner was served inside the barn. Guests filled every table. Toasts began. Daniel's best man told embarrassing college stories. My mother cried again. People laughed. Then the catering manager quietly approached Lauren. Lauren's smile vanished. She glanced toward Mark. The two of them stepped outside. I waited 10 seconds, then I followed. They didn't see me. The payment still hasn't gone through, Lauren whispered. It will. They're threatening to hold dessert. I said I'll handle it. What if Claire— Stop saying her name. Lauren rubbed her temples. This wasn't supposed to happen. It won't if you keep your nerve. I stepped backward before they noticed me. Rachel had been right. Don't confront. Observe. Collect. Let them keep talking. People who believe they've won always say too much. The half an hour later, Mark found me near the dessert table. There you are. He held a manila folder. Exactly like the one I'd seen in Ethan's video. I figured we'd get this out of the way. He smiled. 5 minutes. He led me toward a small office near the back hallway. The same hallway. The same door. He placed the folder on the desk, nothing complicated. I opened it. Mortgage documents. Loan disclosures, electronic authorization forms. Then my stomach tightened. There it was, the Bennett Family Education Trust. Ethan's trust. Exactly where it had no business being. I kept reading. Mark watched me carefully. So, I looked up. Why is Ethan's trust listed here? His expression didn't change. It isn't. I slid the page across the desk. It literally is. He glanced down. Oh. As if he'd never noticed. That's standard language. It doesn't look standard. It is. I kept my voice calm, then explain it. It's just collateral language. My son's education fund isn't collateral. It won't actually be touched. Then why is it there? Mark sighed. You always do this. Do what? You overthink everything. There it was. The familiar move. Not an explanation. A criticism. He leaned closer. Claire, his voice softened. I know things have been difficult, but this helps everyone. I just need your signature. I looked at the signature page. My name waiting. My pulse slowed. Strangely, I wasn't scared anymore. I looked him straight in the eye. I'd rather have Rachel review it first. His jaw tightened. Why? Because she's my attorney. The room went silent. For the first time all day, Mark stopped smiling. Mark stared at me for several long seconds. Then he laughed, not because anything was funny, because he thought laughter could make me doubt myself. Rachel, he said, seriously? I closed the folder. Seriously? You hired a lawyer without telling me? I hired one 3 months ago. His smile disappeared. For the separation? The muscles in his jaw tightened. I thought we agreed we weren't turning this into a war. I met his eyes. I thought we agreed you wouldn't lie to me. Neither of us spoke. Outside the office, I could hear music drifting through the barn. Someone laughed, glasses clinked. The wedding carried on as if nothing had changed. Mark took a slow breath. You're making this bigger than it is. Then explain the trust. I already did. No, you dismissed it. It isn't being used. Then remove it. It doesn't work that way. I stood. I'm not signing anything tonight. His voice hardened. The deadline is midnight. I guess you'll miss it. You don't understand how much depends on this. I looked straight at him. I think I'm finally starting to. I picked up my purse. As I reached the door, his voice stopped me. If you walk away, I turned. This is going to get ugly. For 18 years, that sentence had worked. Whenever we argued, it was always the same. If I questioned him, things would get ugly. If I asked for proof, things would get ugly. If I refused to apologize first, things would get ugly. Eventually, I had learned that ugly usually meant days of silence, emotional manipulation, or long speeches about how difficult I was to live with. This time, the word meant nothing. I opened the door. I didn't make it ugly, Mark. You did. I walked away. I stayed at the reception another hour. Not because I wanted to, because Rachel had been clear, act normal, don't tip your hand. So I smiled for pictures. I congratulated Lauren and Daniel. I hugged relatives. I even danced once with Ethan because he insisted. For anyone watching, I looked like a sister celebrating a wedding. Inside, I was building a timeline. Every conversation, every document, every lie. I wasn't gathering memories anymore. I was gathering evidence. No. By the time Ethan and I got home that night, it was almost 11. He fell asleep in the back seat before we reached the driveway. I carried him inside. His little arms wrapped around my neck even in his sleep. When I tucked him into bed, he opened one eye. Mom? I'm here. Are we okay? The question nearly broke me. I kissed his forehead. We're going to be. He closed his eyes again. I stood beside his bed for a long time. Then I walked into the kitchen, opened my laptop, and copied the video into 3 different places. Cloud storage, an external hard drive, a secure folder Rachel had shared with me. Only after everything had uploaded did I allow myself to cry. Not loudly, just enough to let the fear out. So, what, T? Rachel called me at 7:00 the next morning. I've already contacted the trust administrator. So early? They opened at 8 lakh. What did they say? They're checking whether anyone has attempted to use the trust as collateral. I sat down. If they did, we'll know soon. She paused. I also need you to bring me every financial document you've received from Mark in the last 2 years. Everything? Everything. Tax returns, mortgage statements, bank records, retirement accounts, business emails, loan applications. Anything with your signature. I'll start looking. I have a feeling we're not dealing with one bad document. Her voice became very quiet. I think we're looking at a pattern. By noon, my dining room looked like an accountant's office. Folders covered every chair. Old tax returns, insurance policies, mortgage paperwork, closing documents from our refinance, statements from Ethan's education trust. I hadn't looked at some of them in years, mostly because I'd trusted Mark. He handled the finances. That had been our arrangement. I managed our home. He managed investments. It had seemed practical. Now it felt dangerously naive. I compared signatures, dates, account numbers. Something caught my eye. A home equity withdrawal. 38,000 8 months earlier. I frowned. I had no memory of approving it. I kept digging. Another transfer, 22,000. Then snorts another, 15,000. Each one labeled as business expenses. None of them looked familiar. I called Rachel. I found something. Email it. 5 minutes later, she called back. Claire, yeah? Did Mark ever own an LLC with Lauren? No. According to these transfers papers shuffled. Someone thought he did. Ski by late afternoon, Rachel had answers. None of them were good. There's an LLC. What? It was registered 18 months ago. My sister, Mark and Lauren are both listed. I couldn't speak. Rachel continued. It received multiple transfers from accounts connected to your household. Why would they? We don't know yet. But that's where we're looking. I leaned back in my chair. Images from the past started fitting together. Lauren calling because she was a little short this month. Mark insisting we postpone replacing our leaking roof. The expensive bridal shower. The luxury honeymoon. The designer dress Lauren claimed she'd gotten on sale. It hadn't been on sale. I'd paid for it without ever knowing. She, the trust administrator, finally returned Rachel's call. She called me immediately. They tried. My heart stopped. What? 3 weeks ago, they attempted to list Ethan's trust as secondary security for a commercial loan. I gripped the edge of the table. Did it go through? No. I closed my eyes. Relief flooded my body. Why not? The administrator refused authorization. I blinked. They needed both trustees. Which means they were missing your approval, I whispered. So that's why he needed me to sign. Rachel didn't answer. She didn't have to. Everything suddenly made sense. The pressure, the fake deadline, the folder, the wedding. He hadn't wanted paperwork. He'd wanted my signature. That afternoon, Rachel filed an emergency motion asking the probate court to temporarily suspend Mark's authority over Ethan's trust until the investigation was complete. She also contacted the bank's fraud department. By evening, the trust had been frozen. No withdrawals, no changes, no new loans. For the first time in 24 hours, I felt like I could breathe. See. The next surprise arrived just before dinner. Daniel called. I almost ignored it. I answered, "Hello?" His voice sounded exhausted. "Claire, I need to ask you something." "Okay, did you contact First National Bank?" "Through my attorney." A long silence. "They froze our business account." "I know. They said there's a fraud investigation." "There is." Another silence. Finally, he asked, "What the hell is going on?" I looked out the kitchen window. Ethan was throwing a baseball against the backyard fence. He looked happy, carefree, exactly the way an 8-year-old should look. I turned back to the phone. "Daniel," I said quietly, "did you ever actually watch me sign those loan papers?" Silence, longer this time. Then no. I closed my eyes. I didn't think so. His breathing changed. "Claire, I think someone lied to both of us. CLARE that night. Rachel sent me one final document. It wasn't from the bank. It wasn't from the trust. It came from family court. Someone had started preparing custody paperwork weeks earlier. My hands shook as I opened the draft. Most of it was unfinished. Then I reached the witness statements. The first name belonged to Mark. Meal the second made me stop breathing. Lauren Hayes, my own sister. Under penalty of perjury, she claimed I was emotionally unstable, that I neglected Ethan, that she feared for his safety in my care. At the bottom of the page was a sentence I read 3 times before it finally sank in. I believe Ethan would be safer living with his father. I stared at the screen until the words blurred. Then I whispered the only question that mattered. When did you stop being my sister? I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I was afraid, because my mind refused to stop connecting pieces that should never have existed in the same puzzle. The forged signature, the trust, the custody papers, Lauren's sworn statement. For hours, I kept asking myself the same question. How long had they been planning this? Months? A year? Long enough that my sister had looked me in the eyes at Thanksgiving, accepted Christmas presents for Ethan, hugged me on my birthday, all while helping my husband build a case against me. At 3:30 in the morning, I stopped asking questions that couldn't yet be answered. I started focusing on the ones that mattered. How do I protect my son? How do I protect the evidence? How do I make sure they never get another chance? Rachel already had a plan. By 9, I was sitting across from her conference table. Legal pads, coffee cups, bank statements. Everything was neatly organized. Rachel wasn't emotional. That's why I'd hired her. "We're going to move quickly," she said. "How quickly?" "As quickly as the law allows." She slid a folder toward me. I'd already filed for temporary sole authority over Ethan's trust. I nodded. "What about custody?" "Next." "What about Mark?" "We don't chase him." She looked directly at me. "We make him chase us." I like that answer. More than I expected. She continued. "This isn't revenge, no, it's accountability." I smiled for the first time in 2 days. That's a better word. Me. The paperwork took most of the morning. Emergency financial orders, preservation notices, requests that neither Mark nor Lauren destroy emails, text messages, electronic signatures, cloud files, or banking records. Rachel explained every document before I signed it. The contrast hit me immediately. She wanted me to understand every page. Mark had wanted me to sign without reading. That difference alone said everything about both of them. Yeah. Around noon, my phone buzzed. "Mark." I let it ring. Then again. Then again. Finally, a text appeared. "We need to talk." I ignored it. Another message. "You're making a huge mistake." Then another. "Rachel is poisoning you against me." I laughed. Not because it was funny. Because even now, he couldn't imagine I had reached my own conclusions. Everything had to be someone else's influence. Someone else's fault. 20 minutes later, my doorbell camera alerted me. Mark. He stood on my porch, holding flowers. Of course he did. To anyone driving by, he looked like a husband trying to save his marriage. I watched him through my phone. He rang again. I didn't move. Finally, he spoke toward the door. "Claire, please." Silence. "See, I know you're home." Still nothing. His voice became tighter. "This has gotten completely out of control." I opened the camera microphone. "What do you want?" Relief flashed across his face. "There you are. I'm not opening the door. We need to talk. We're talking. Not like this." Actually, I looked at Rachel, who nodded. "This works just fine." He forced a smile. "I think you're overreacting. I think you're on camera." His eyes flicked toward the doorbell. "Good. Let him remember. Everything mattered now." He lowered his voice. "You froze the trust." "Yes." "You froze business accounts." "Yes." "People are getting hurt." I leaned closer to the speaker. "You forged my signature." His face changed. Only for a second, but it changed. "I don't know what Rachel told you." I watched the video. Nothing. Not a word. He knew exactly which video. After several seconds, he sighed. "It wasn't what it looked like." "Really?" "You took it out of context." My 8-year-old recorded the context. His shoulders dropped. "This doesn't have to destroy us." I almost admired his confidence. Even now. He still thought the marriage was the leverage. It wasn't. Ethan was. And he'd already lost that leverage. "I'll have my attorney contact yours." I disconnected. He stood there another full minute. Then he left the flowers on my porch. I threw them away before Ethan came home. Yeah. That afternoon, Lauren called. Once, twice.
5 times.
Finally, I answered. She was crying, real tears, or very convincing ones, Claire. I didn't respond. "I know you're angry." I didn't want any of this. I closed my eyes. "You signed the affidavit." Silence. I was scared. So was Ethan. She cried harder. "Mark said I don't care what Mark said. He told me it was only a backup." "A backup? In case the divorce got ugly." I laughed. A bitter, exhausted laugh. "You helped make sure it would." She kept crying. "You don't understand." "No, I understand perfectly," she whispered. "I never thought he'd actually use it." I felt something inside me finally settle. For 2 days I'd been hoping she'd tell me she'd refused, hoping she'd never signed it, hoping there was some explanation that would let me keep my sister. There wasn't. She had made her choice. "I'm sorry," she whispered. I believed she was. I also knew it changed nothing. "I'm sure you are." "Can we meet?" "No, please. No, I'll fix this." "You can't." Another silence. Then she asked the question I'd been waiting for. "Can you unfreeze the accounts?" There it was. Not "How's Ethan?" Not "How are you?" The money. Always the money. "The caterer hasn't been paid," she whispered. "The florist is threatening to sue." "Our employees," I interrupted gently. "The employees didn't do anything wrong. They'll lose paychecks." Gave me pause. Rachel had warned me about this. Collateral damage. Innocent people. "I'll tell my attorney to cooperate on legitimate payroll." Lauren sounded relieved, but not $1 connected to Ethan's trust. Her relief disappeared. "Claire." No, the conversation ended there. Later that evening, Daniel requested a meeting. Rachel insisted we meet in her office. He looked terrible. His wedding ring was already gone. I didn't know. Rachel said nothing. Daniel looked at me. I swear, I believed him. Not completely innocent. But not fully informed either. He opened a folder. I found these emails, invoices, transfer records. Lauren had hidden thousands of dollars in business expenses. Mark had approved every transfer. Daniel rubbed his face. I asked where the money came from. And I let myself believe the answers. Rachel finally spoke. Choosing not to ask is still a choice. Daniel nodded slowly. I know. I've already agreed to cooperate. He looked at me. I'm sorry. I appreciated the apology. It didn't erase the damage. But unlike Mark, Daniel wasn't asking to escape consequences. He was accepting them. That mattered. 3 weeks later, we gathered in family court for the emergency hearing. Mark looked confident. His attorney looked expensive. Mine looked prepared. The judge reviewed financial filings, custody requests, bank notices. Then Mark's attorney stood. Your Honor, Mrs. Bennett is acting out of anger over the breakdown of her marriage. Rachel didn't react. She has frozen legitimate business activity and is attempting to alienate a loving father. The judge looked toward Rachel. She stood calmly. Permission to play Exhibit 7? Granted. Rachel connected her laptop. The courtroom filled with static. Then Ethan's shaky video began. Mark's voice echoed through the speakers. Once I have temporary custody, Claire won't control the trust anymore. No one moved.